how fun it is to get to be with people who are so diligent about working with it and expressing it here. And it ties into what I'm going to talk about today, which you'll see in just a moment. So before I begin, I want to say welcome. And I'm Charles Perry, Reverend Charles Perry, the senior minister here for anyone who's new. And then I also want to say, for all of us who are fans of one team or another, that these colors I'm wearing today have nothing to do with any team anywhere, not Ohio, not Alabama, Wisconsin, none of those. I'm actually wearing red today in honor of the labor movement, because this is Labor Day weekend. And, you know, aside from just being kind of the weekend that marks the end of the summer, and a time for everyone to enjoy the beginning of football season and a 3-day weekend and picnics and barbecues, we honor those who spent a lot of their life's work, and many of whom spent their life for the furtherance of the labor movement, to take care of those who work, you know, to stop things like child labor, sweatshops, to make it safe to go into places like mines and work. And for, you know, a kid who grew up in West Virginia, you know, I feel that very deeply. The town I lived in was not a mining town, but they, you know, it was certainly a big part of the fabric of our state. You know, and I know that labor also is deep in the heart of Birmingham, because, you know, this was a steel town, and still is to some extent. You know, we have mines around here, we have mills around here, and we have people who have given their lives laboring to make our life a little bit easier and better. And today we honor them, and we also honor the work that we are here to do. And to do that, I'm going to do something that I don't normally do. I'm going to actually read a passage from the Bible, and we're going to talk about it. Right? Yeah. Yeah. And this actually is from Jesus. So before, we used to do acting scenes. When I was learning method acting, my old acting teacher always used to say, what do you have to know before the scene begins, that if you don't know it, the scene can't begin? So as I read this passage, what you have to know before I read the passage, so that it kind of makes sense, is this is a point in Matthew where Jesus is attempting to describe what the kingdom of heaven is to people. And it follows another parable, the parable of the 10 virgins. And he keeps kind of throwing out different stories, hoping that some of them will stick. Now, in the series we just finished last week on Robert Brummett's Finding Yourself in Transition, towards the end of the book, one of the things that he says is that as we make our evolution in consciousness, as we are preparing to make the next jump, very often we don't even have the language to describe what that jump is to, because we're becoming something that we weren't before. And that not only counts, you know, here in the world, but in consciousness. So if we're becoming something new in consciousness, we may not have the words to describe what that is. And he said that perhaps the best thing that we can do as human beings is to look at other human beings that have made that jump before us, people like Jesus and the Buddha, and say, well, like, what did they do and what did they say? And let's take a look at how they lived, and maybe we might get a clue so that we can make that jump too. All right? So this is Jesus describing the kingdom of heaven, which is kind of that next evolutionary jump that we're called to. Robert mentioned that the level we're looking at was the level the Buddha described when someone asked him, are you a god, are you a man? And he said, I am awake. So what Jesus called kingdom of heaven consciousness, and what the Buddha called being awake, is that next evolutionary level in consciousness that we are aspiring to, I hope, as human beings. So Jesus, this is his second parable in a row with this particular group, trying to describe what is this kingdom of heaven thing? How does it work? What is it like? He says, for it is, and it is the kingdom of heaven, for it is, and this is from Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 through 30, for those of you that want to follow along with your Bibles. Or on your smartphone Bible, yes, right? For it is as if a man going on a journey summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents. And I'll stop here for just a second. This is where we get the word talent from. A talent in the ancient Roman Empire was an amount of money about equivalent to 15 years' wages for the average worker. So it was a fairly sizable chunk of money. All right. So to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. The one who had received the 5 talents went off at once and traded with them and made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had the 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And the one with the 2 talents also came forward, saying, Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Then the one who had received the 1 talent also came forward, saying, Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But his master replied, You wicked and lazy slave. You knew, did you, that I reap where I do not sow, and gather where I do not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one with 10 talents. For to all those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. It's like, now at first reading, you might think, dude, really, Jesus? That's the kingdom of heaven? The rich get richer, the poor get poorer? Is that how that's what's up? But then we take a deeper look at this. And first we'll take a look at it at the level of kind of the practical world, the world of the material. So what happened? Right? The guy gives his slaves, and that translation, some of you may have heard that as, well done, thou good and faithful servant. This translation is the New Revised Standard Version, which is one of the better and more scholarly, appropriate translations. So they're called slaves, because back in those days they would have been. And again, remember, Jesus is speaking to his audience. And slavery was a common practice back then. Thankfully, it is not anymore. Well, at least not here in America too much. We're still working on the human trafficking thing, but, we'll just keep working on that. Anyway, I digress. So he gives talents, abundance, wealth to them, expecting that they will do something with them, that there will be a return. And one of the real keys is in what happens to the guy with 5. He says, the one who had received the 5 talents went off at once and traded with them. He did not waste any time. He didn't let the grass grow under his feet. He didn't say, oh, I got plenty of time. The old man ain't going to be back for, years or whatever. I got all this money, I'll get around to it. He went off at once and got to work. And then it says, and the person that had 2 talents did the same thing. He went off at once. Now, some of us might think, well, gee, it wasn't fair because one of the dudes got 5 and one got 2 and one got 1. So again, going back to the text, we say that to each according to his ability. It's interesting, when Charles Fillmore commented on this, he basically said that, Charles Fillmore is one of the co-founders of Unity. He said that essentially all of us as human beings pretty much have the same talents. It's a matter of what we do. Now, I might not have the same talent that Steve has. I don't have the same talent as many of you do. But what we all have is the ability to do something with what we have been given. And that is a real key here. We look around at the world and we see people who, are born with a trust fund of, hundreds of millions of dollars. And we say, how could I ever have a chance to achieve what that person has achieved? But then we look out and we find people, like J.K. Rowling, who was a single mom on welfare in Great Britain when she tapped into her talent and became one of the wealthier women in the world. She was a billionaire, but she gave away so much of her money to charity that now she's just a multimillionaire. Yeah. But it was a matter of actually doing something with what she'd been given. And in her case, that was imagination. And we all have one of those. So it's interesting to note that both the person who started out with 5 and the person who started out with 2, they achieved the same return. They both achieved 100% return on the work, on the labor, on the talent that they invested. Because they immediately set off to work and they did the best they could with what they had. But then there's the other guy, the one who buried his talent in the ground. And what he says is very illuminating. He says, Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you did not scatter seed, so I was afraid. And I went and hid your talent in the ground. The master, when we look at the story at this level, is essentially God. It's the universe. And what I have to ask is, how many of us have been afraid because we think the universe is against us at some level? That life isn't fair. I know I've felt that way. I don't know about how many of you have, but I know I sure have it at different times in my life. And that temptation not to expend our talent, not to risk, not to reach out and do everything we can with what we have is a strong temptation. Because fear tells us you can't, it won't matter. It's never going to amount to anything anyway. The universe is somehow against me. At the beginning of this year, we talked about making this year the year of living with nothing and no one against you. And this illustration of what life in the kingdom of heaven really is one of the best illustrations there is in the Bible. It makes it very clear. When we live as if there is nothing and no one against us, when we live understanding that the universe is supporting us, when we live knowing that God is behind us, that our Master has given us talent to do something with while we're here, we will achieve a return if we get up and do something with what we've been given. None of us is entitled to achieve the kingdom of heaven just by sitting around. As children of God, we are heirs to the kingdom, but as this points out, there is a huge difference between being an heir to the kingdom and actually earning our way into it. You know, what happened to the third guy at the end of the story? He got thrown out into the darkness where there's a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth. I think about what that really means, and to me, it's like if I were at the end of my life and I realized this is it and I'm about to go, and I look back at my life and I thought to myself, wow, I really wasted my talent. I really could have done something with this life, and I didn't. I never tried. You know, I thought I was playing it safe, but I was really playing it scared. That to me is really a moment of wailing and gnashing teeth. It's like, you know, if only I could go back and do it again. And I'll tell you, I've got some pretty obscure holes punched by ticket. And I have failed at some pretty esoteric things, at least by the world's standards. You know, I thought I was going to be a great director. You know, went off, got my master's degree in directing for theater and film. You know, I ended up spending a lot of time in business and kind of got invited to leave that during the last, Great Recession. I've done several other things that I thought, gee, maybe this is it. But what it was it was simply life's way of preparing me for this. Because everything I've learned, from how to tell a story with pictures, to how to stand up in front of people and teach a lesson, to how to be a contracting officer, all of it is things that make me better at what I do right now. Even being a recovered alcoholic, even that whole mess. I have such a deeper understanding of where people are, people who are struggling with an attachment to the idea that happiness is somewhere on the outside of us. It's something that we need to go out there and grab and put into ourselves, or rub up against, or own and possess. I understand that at a very deep level. And that's a problem that touches a whole lot of us. So many of us think that happiness is somewhere out there, when we need to look in here. Because that's the only place we're going to find it. So at least I'm hoping that when I go to, lay down to sleep for the last time, I'm not going to be wailing or gnashing my teeth. I'm going to be really tired and ready to go. So that was good. I'm good, right? Ready to roll. Let's see what's next. Instead of being like slave number 3, who ended up out there in the darkness wailing and gnashing his teeth. Now this principle, the idea that, this kingdom of heaven that's all around us will give back to us what we put into it, is a real key idea. And this I found from a pamphlet. It was a little treatise that Charles Fillmore did in 1927. It was called The Providing Law. And Charles wrote that there is a universal law of increase. Its workings are not confined to bank accounts, but are on every plane of manifestation. To comply with the law and bring forth its beneficent results in fullness, Conscious cooperation on the part of man is required. And that's what, 5 talent and 2 talent guys were doing. They were consciously cooperating with the law. First, use the talent that you have, whatever it may be. Increase comes by use. Then have faith in the law. Do not reason too much, but forge ahead in faith and boldness. If you think about outside conditions as hindrances, they become such to you. Then you become fearful and bury your talent. Look away from the outer and see but the one power. That is such a great way of summing this whole thing up. We got to take what we've got and just do what we can with it, no matter what it looks like out there on the outside. And again, that kind of gets back to the distinction between truth and fact, right? Truth does not change. Facts change all the time. The fact may have been that when they transmitted the temperature to my phone this morning, it was 74 degrees. When I got out there and walked the dog, it sure felt a lot hotter than that, and it probably was by then. Okay? That's a fact, The truth does not change. The truth that as we give, so shall we receive. As we push out to the universe is going to push back, and in truth, we cannot outgive the universe. We really can't. I think one of my favorite examples of how this works is in the movie Forrest Gump. Is there anybody that hadn't seen Forrest Gump? Right? So here's this guy, right? Yeah, like lots of times, right? Here's this guy who is, and they make it very clear at the beginning of the film, he is below average, right? So he would kind of be like the one talent dude, He doesn't have a whole lot going on there, right? But all he does is gives 110% effort in everything he does. If you just go back and remember the film, it's like, wow, he could run really fast. That was a talent. Yeah, after he ran the braces off his legs and then ran everywhere he went around his hometown for about 10 years, then he could fly like the wind. But it was because he was willing to work with what he had, those spindly little legs that he ran everywhere on. He became a champion ping pong player. Yeah, after he played ping pong every day, all day while he was in rehab after getting blown up in Vietnam. Right? He ended up with the love of his life. Yeah, because he never, ever, ever stopped loving her and treating her that way. Everything he did with a pure heart and with a passion for doing the very best he could and making the very most of who he was as a human being. I think that's one of the reasons that movie touches us. Yes, it's a really well done film, but it's the heart of that man that Tom Hanks portrays that really in the end is, I think, what draws us to him. And I think that all of us wish that we could see a little bit of Forrest in ourselves. That innocence and that pure love and that absolute devotion to being the best we can be no matter what. So there's another whole level to this. We've been kind of talking about how it plays out in the manifest realm, how it works out in the world. And I think that's something that's important. Before we rebranded Unity and we started calling it a positive path for spiritual living, we used to call it positive, practical Christianity. So I always want to give you guys something that works out there. All right? And there's also a whole other level to it. And that's that level that hopefully works for us in here. This is also a parable about how we do our work in consciousness. And I want to read another little Quote, this is actually from a sermon that Charles Fillmore gave in 1930. Sunday, June 1st, 1930. Here is the one great pivotal point in the lesson, and that's in the parable. How are you using your abilities? Are you using them spiritually? Or are you trying to get increase out of a material activity? It seems almost unbelievable that the Son of God, one who has originally an insight into his spiritual source, should use his God-given abilities in a material way. But we have here to inject this factor of free will. If we think that the material side is the safe side, like this man who was working for safety first, we bury our talents by using them in the earth, by giving them an environment of materiality, and so we fall short. We don't realize that 95% of our resources come from spirit. They are provided by God. I would actually correct Charlie and say, actually 100% of them come from God. But the point he's making here is this. What most of us tend to do is take our talents and bury them in the ground of the material. We don't bring them up into the realm of consciousness, into the realm of spirit. When we teach tithing here, we talk about tithing of your time and your talent and your treasure. A lot of people misunderstand that tithing of our time. They think, oh, that's the time I spend volunteering at church. That's what we call tithing of your talent. Tithing of our time is devoting a portion of our time back to our own spiritual growth and development. It's the time that we spend in prayer and meditation and reading spiritual texts. For some of us, doing yoga or some other practice, maybe like Tai Chi, coming to classes, but living our spiritual life, feeding our soul. We only get out of this plane of existence with one thing, and that's a soul. So why do we keep spending all of our talent on building up those things that, as Jesus said in another lesson, those things where the thieves break in, where, moths, show up and they things rust away? Why are we doing that instead of building up these treasures that are going to be with us forever? So that is the other lesson here. And that is kind of a call for us to begin using our spiritual gifts, our spiritual talents, to put something in that bank account, the one that's not going to fall away. We do a spiritual gifts inventory here from time to time. How many of you have been through that? I'm just curious. Okay, so there's a few of you that have done it. That is a really tremendous tool for kind of deciding, hey, maybe this is something that, this is a talent that I have that maybe I didn't even know I had. And a way for me to do something that's going to, kind of stretch my muscles and bring some return on that investment. Something that's not measured in what I put in the bank or what I drive into the parking lot, but measured in how I feel. It's measured in whether or not I truly feel like in this moment, if I'm in the kingdom of heaven, or if I'm just out there in the darkness wailing and gnashing my teeth. So many of us almost never even think about that other side of it, about that other way that we use our talents, our time, our life. We get so caught up in doing what has to be done that we just don't really think about the other thing. There's the old Zen proverb, the master saying, how often do you meditate? And the person telling him, well, master, I meditate half an hour a day, and, unless I don't have enough time. And he says, well, if you don't have enough time, then you need to meditate an hour a day. Right? The lesson being that what we invest in ourselves, what we invest in our spirit, is going to more than pay dividends in the way that we show up everywhere else in our lives. It is when we are the busiest and under the most stress that we need to place our talents into our spiritual growth the most. I may have told this story before, but towards the end of my rotation in the desert in 2010, because I'm fairly lucid, I was asked by our public affairs officer to be one of the people who was part of a program where they would make soldiers available to speak to the press back home and be interviewed by local radio and TV stations, mostly from around our hometowns. So they get me in this program, and I'm up at the headquarters, and the public affairs guy is talking to me. He's kind of getting me warmed up before the first call from one of the radio stations that's going to interview me. And he said, okay, Chief, so, just a couple of quick questions. He says, so how have you made it through this rotation? What'd you hang on to? What'd you do? And I said, meditation. I don't think he was expecting that. In fact, I'd almost bet I'm the first person that actually answered that question that way to him. But what I made the practice of doing, as soon as I was able to get boots on ground and kind of get a schedule that was steady, is rather than eating lunch the way most people normally did, I would run back to my little hooch where my room, and I would make a smoothie real quick, and then I would meditate for the rest of my lunch hour, and then I'd go back out to work. And usually by, the middle of my day, I needed meditation. Big time. It made a tremendous difference in the way I showed up, especially in the afternoons. But it's like that for all of us, and it's something that if we will remember to expend that talent, if we will remember to take that time, we will get that return on our investment. But no matter what we do, in order to really honor our life's work, what we have to be willing to do is to let go of our fear, to let go of any lingering belief that the universe is against us, that the odds are stacked against us, that God doesn't really want to see us succeed. We have to be willing to let go of that and, like 5 talent and 2 talent guy, just get out there and get after it. And be willing to accept a few things that feel like failure along the way, because we don't know how our good is going to show up all the time. I will tell you, when I began my working life, I would have never guessed that the kingdom of heaven to me would look like being a minister in Birmingham, Alabama. But that's what it is for me today. And I could not be any more grateful for the way that my talents have come back to me. Please join me in prayer. Sweet Spirit, today we are so blessed and we are so thankful. We stand in awe of the universe filled with abundant blessings, with the talents that we have been given. Today we simply ask for a reminder to go out, to do what we can, and to be what we have come here to be. Thank you, sweet Spirit, for each precious soul that joins us on this path, for every hand that raises and helps us, for every smile, for every hug. for every heart that is open to receive our talent and to give us theirs in return. We thank you for all that is in you and for your blessings and for your love, we say. Thank you, thank you, thank you, God. So it is.